Maya Johnson is a 24-year-old night shift nurse drowning in student debt when an emergency call to treat a gunshot wound leads her into the world of Kim Tae-yoon, a ruthless Korean mafia boss who decides one kiss seals her fate forever. At 24, Maya balanced the relentless demands of 12-hour shifts at City General Hospital with the crushing weight of $80,000 in student loan debt. She was practical, focused, and knew the value of every dollar that passed through her hands. Her natural hair was styled in protective braids that caught the fluorescent hospital lights as she moved efficiently between patients, and her warm brown eyes held a determination that had carried her through nursing school despite working 3 jobs. She was driven by an uncompromising vision, becoming a pediatric nurse, healing children, and building a life where her grandmother could receive proper medical care instead of rationing insulin, because Medicare wouldn't cover the good kind. But dreams cost money, and money was exactly what Maya didn't have. Her grandmother Dolores had been managing diabetes for 15 years with medication that barely kept her blood sugar stable. The new insulin that could change everything cost $800 per month. Maya's paycheck disappeared into loan payments, rent on their tiny shared apartment, and whatever medical expenses insurance refused to cover. She worked doubles whenever possible, picked up overtime shifts that left her exhausted, and still watched her savings account hover around $300 no matter how hard she tried. Maya was wiping down the nurse's station at 2 in the morning when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Private medical emergency. Cash payment, $5,000. Discretion required. Address attached. She stared at the message, her tired mind immediately suspicious. $5,000 was more than she made in 6 weeks. Nobody paid that kind of money for legitimate medical care, especially not in cash, especially not at 2 in the morning. This had to be something illegal, something dangerous, something that would require treating injuries that couldn't be reported to authorities. Maya should delete the message. She should finish her shift, go home to their cramped apartment, and continue the endless cycle of work and debt that defined her existence. But $5,000 would buy her grandmother 3 months of proper insulin. $5,000 would mean Dolores could eat without checking her blood sugar first, could live without the constant fear of diabetic episodes that sent them to the emergency room they couldn't afford. The phone buzzed again. Time sensitive. Life or death situation. Will you help? Maya looked around the quiet hospital corridor, calculating. She had medical training, emergency experience, and steady hands that had saved lives under pressure. If someone needed help badly enough to pay $5,000, they were either desperate or dangerous. Probably both. But her grandmother needed that insulin, and Maya's legitimate income would never stretch far enough to cover it. Against every instinct screaming in her head, Maya typed back, "I can be there in 40 minutes. What's the nature of the emergency? Gunshot wound. Upper chest. Patient stable, but needs professional care. Bring whatever supplies you can." Maya's blood ran cold. Gunshot wounds meant police reports, meant investigations, meant the kind of attention that led to criminal charges. But gunshot wounds also meant someone was bleeding, someone needed help, someone might die if she didn't respond. Her medical training warred with her survival instincts as she stared at the address. It was in the warehouse district, the kind of industrial area that emptied after business hours, the kind of place where things happened that didn't make it into police reports. She gathered supplies from the hospital's emergency stock, justifying each item as routine inventory she could replace later. Suture kits, antibiotics, pain medication, surgical instruments, sterile dressings. Everything needed to treat a serious gunshot wound outside of a hospital setting. Her hands moved with automatic precision while her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The drive through the empty city streets gave Maya 20 minutes to reconsider her decision. 20 minutes to turn around, go home, delete the message, and pretend this opportunity had never presented itself. But every traffic light reminded her of another month her grandmother would spend rationing medication. Another month of watching the strongest woman she'd ever known slowly weakening, because proper medical care was a luxury they couldn't afford. The warehouse district after midnight felt like a different world. Expensive cars lined the loading dock of an unmarked building, their sleek profiles gleaming under security lights that illuminated everything with harsh white clarity. Men in dark suits stood near the entrance, their body language suggesting they were accustomed to violence, their eyes tracking her approach with professional assessment. This wasn't a back alley emergency. This was organized, expensive, and very definitely criminal. Maya parked her 15-year-old Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling like an imposter in her faded scrubs and worn sneakers. She gathered her medical bag, took a deep breath that tasted like fear and determination, and approached the men guarding the entrance. "I'm here about the medical emergency," Maya said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. The shorter man nodded and gestured for her to follow. They led her through a loading dock into a space that had been converted into something resembling a high-end office, complete with leather furniture, expensive artwork, and technology that probably cost more than Maya's annual salary. But the luxury couldn't quite mask the underlying atmosphere of controlled violence, the sense that terrible things happened here and were efficiently cleaned up afterward. The patient was lying on a leather couch in what appeared to be a conference room, conscious but pale, pressing a blood-soaked towel against his left shoulder. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with features that suggested Korean heritage and eyes that remained alert despite obvious pain. Someone had already cut away his shirt, revealing a wound that was serious but not immediately life-threatening. Assuming Maya could stop the bleeding and prevent infection, Maya moved into medical mode, her training overriding her fear as she approached the patient. "I'm Maya. I'm a registered nurse. Can you tell me your name?" "June," he replied, his English accented but clear. "Been shot for about an hour. Bleeding won't stop." Maya examined the wound with professional efficiency. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing major arteries, but causing significant tissue damage that would require careful cleaning and suturing. It was exactly the kind of injury that normally would require emergency surgery and weeks of hospital care, but could be treated in the field by someone with the right training and equipment. "You're going to be fine," Maya told June as she opened her medical bag. "This is going to hurt, but I need to clean the wound thoroughly and close it with sutures. Do you have any allergies to medications?" As she worked, Maya became aware of being watched, not just by June, who was naturally focused on her care, but by someone else in the room. She could feel eyes on her as she cleaned the wound, administered local anesthetic, and began the careful process of suturing damaged tissue. Whoever was observing remained silent, but Maya could sense their presence like a weight in the room, could feel their attention tracking every movement of her hands. The wound was more complicated than it initially appeared, requiring multiple layers of sutures to properly close muscle and skin. Maya worked with the steady concentration that had earned her top marks in nursing school, her hands moving with precision that came from months of emergency room experience. She was good at this, good at remaining calm under pressure, good at providing care when people's lives hung in the balance. When she finally finished, June's shoulder was properly bandaged and his color had returned to normal. She administered antibiotics and pain medication, then provided detailed instructions for wound care over the next week. "Keep it clean and dry, watch for signs of infection, change the dressing daily. You'll need to rest that arm for at least 10 days. "Thank you," June said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "You probably saved my life." Maya was cleaning her instruments when she finally looked up and saw the man who had been watching her work. He was standing near the conference room's windows, partially in shadow, but the expensive lines of his suit and the controlled way he held himself suggested someone accustomed to command. He was Korean, probably early 30s, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to assess everything with calculating intelligence. Even in the dim lighting, Maya could see that his clothing was impeccable, custom-tailored in a way that spoke of serious money and serious power. "Kim Tae-young," he said by way of introduction, stepping forward into the light. His presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size and everything to do with an aura of controlled intensity that made Maya instinctively step back. "Maya," she replied, suddenly very aware of her worn scrubs and the blood on her hands from treating June's wound. "You did excellent work," Tae-young observed, his English perfect but carrying a slight accent that made his words sound more formal than casual conversation. "Professional, efficient, calm under pressure. These are valuable qualities." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks under his scrutiny. She packed her remaining supplies with hands that trembled slightly, suddenly eager to complete this transaction and return to the familiar world of legitimate medical care. I'm just glad I could help. If you could arrange the payment we discussed, I should be getting home. Taeyong moved closer, and Maya caught the scent of expensive cologne, something woodsy and sharp that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope that felt substantial when he handed it to her. 5,000 as agreed, plus an additional 2,000 for your discretion and skill. Maya's eyes widened as she looked inside the envelope and saw more cash than she had ever held at one time. This is too much, she said, trying to hand back the extra money. Taeyong's lips curved in what might have been amusement. Quality medical care is worth paying for, especially when it comes with no questions and no complications. Consider it an investment in future availability. The way he said future availability made Maya's stomach flutter with something between fear and anticipation. She had the unsettling feeling that this man saw her as more than just a nurse who had responded to an emergency call, that he was evaluating her for purposes beyond treating gunshot wounds in warehouse conference rooms. I should go, Maya said, clutching the envelope of money that represented more financial security than she had felt in years. Yes, you should, Taeyong agreed, but his dark eyes remained fixed on her face as if memorizing her features. Drive carefully, Maya. The streets can be dangerous late at night. There was something in his tone, something that suggested he knew exactly how dangerous the streets could be and exactly what kinds of protection might be available to someone under the right circumstances. Maya left the warehouse with $7,000 in cash and the uncomfortable certainty that Kim Taeyong would be calling on her services again. As she drove home through the empty city, Maya's hands shook on the steering wheel. $7,000 would solve her immediate problems, would buy her grandmother months of proper insulin, would give her breathing room she hadn't felt since starting nursing school. But she also knew that money this easy came with complications, came with expectations, came with the kind of entanglements that could change a person's life in ways they never intended. Maya Johnson had just entered a world where medical emergencies paid more than legitimate nursing work, where dangerous men evaluated her like an asset they might want to acquire, where one night's decision could lead to opportunities and risks she wasn't prepared to calculate. She had no way of knowing that Kim Taeyong had already decided she possessed exactly the qualities he had been looking for, that her competence under pressure and her unshakable medical ethics had marked her as someone worth keeping close, worth protecting, worth claiming as his own. 3 days after treating June's gunshot wound, Maya was restocking medical supplies in her apartment when her phone buzzed with another message from the same unknown number. Emergency medical assistance required. Same location. Cash payment $10,000. Time sensitive. Maya stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. $10,000 was double the previous payment, which meant either the injury was worse or the situation more dangerous. She had spent the past 3 days trying to convince herself that the warehouse incident was a one-time necessity, that she could return to legitimate nursing work and pretend she had never entered Kim Taeyong's world. But $10,000 would eliminate her credit card debt entirely, would give her grandmother a full year of proper medical care, would provide security she had never imagined possible. Her grandmother Dolores was sitting in their small living room, testing her blood sugar with the glucose monitor Maya had bought with part of the warehouse money. For the first time in months, the readings were stable, controlled, healthy. Dolores was eating regular meals without fear, sleeping through the night without diabetic episodes, moving with energy Maya hadn't seen in years. The medication Maya could now afford was literally giving her grandmother life. I have to work tonight, Maya told her grandmother, gathering her medical bag with hands that trembled slightly. Another double shift, Dolores asked, concern creasing her weathered features. You've been working yourself too hard lately, baby girl. It's good money, Maya replied, which was true if incomplete. Emergency nursing pays better than regular shifts. The drive to the warehouse district felt different this time. Maya knew what to expect, knew she was entering a world of expensive cars and armed men, knew she would be treating injuries that couldn't be reported to legitimate authorities. But $10,000 represented freedom from the crushing debt that had defined her adult life, represented the ability to provide proper care for the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Maya was 12. The same men guarded the warehouse entrance, recognizing Maya with nods of acknowledgement as she approached. This time they led her deeper into the building, through corridors lined with expensive artwork and security cameras, past rooms where she glimpsed other men in expensive suits conducting business she didn't want to understand. The private office where they brought her was clearly Kim Tae-young's personal workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Leather furniture dominated the room, and technology that looked military-grade occupied a massive desk. But Maya's attention focused immediately on Tae-young himself, who was sitting behind the desk pressing a blood-soaked towel against his left side. His usually impeccable white shirt cut away to reveal a knife wound that was still bleeding freely. "Mr. Kim," Maya said, professional concern overriding her nervousness as she approached the desk. "What happened?" "Territorial dispute," Tae-young replied, his voice steady despite obvious pain. "Blade caught me under the ribs. Refusing hospital treatment." Maya could see why he would avoid legitimate medical facilities. The wound was clearly from a knife fight, the kind of injury that would trigger police investigation and questions about how a businessman had ended up bleeding in an office that probably wasn't listed in any official business registry. "I need you on the couch so I can examine this properly," Maya said, opening her medical bag with practiced efficiency. Tae-young stood carefully, his movements controlled despite the obvious discomfort, and allowed Maya to guide him to the leather couch where she could assess the injury under better lighting. The knife wound was deep but clean, slicing through muscle without hitting vital organs, the kind of injury that would heal completely with proper treatment but could be fatal if left untreated due to blood loss and infection risk. "This is going to need internal sutures," Maya told him as she prepared her instruments. "The bleeding indicates muscle damage that needs to be repaired in layers." "Do what you need to do," Tae-young said, his dark eyes fixed on her face as she worked. His proximity was overwhelming in a way that had nothing to do with the medical emergency. Even injured and bleeding, he radiated the same controlled intensity that had made Maya step back during their first meeting, the same sense of barely contained power that marked him as someone accustomed to command. Maya administered local anesthetic and began the careful process of cleaning and examining the wound. The knife had penetrated deeper than initially apparent, requiring her to work slowly and meticulously to ensure proper healing. As she sutured damaged muscle tissue, she became acutely aware of Tae-young's breathing, the warmth of his skin under her hands, the way his attention never wavered from watching her face. "You're very good at this," Tae-young observed quietly. "Steady hands, no hesitation, complete focus. These are rare qualities." "I've had good training," Maya replied, concentrating on placing sutures with precision that would minimize scarring. "Emergency room experience teaches you to work under pressure." "More than pressure," Tae-young said. "You're working on someone you barely know, in circumstances that would terrify most people, and your hands haven't shaken once. That suggests either exceptional training or exceptional courage." Maya was beginning the external sutures when the lights in the office suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the room in red-tinged illumination that transformed Tae-young's features into sharp planes and dangerous shadows. Before Maya could react, the sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere else in the building, sharp reports that suggested serious weapons and serious violence. "Get down," Tae-young commanded, his voice cutting through Maya's momentary paralysis. But instead of dropping to the floor, Maya's medical training kicked in with automatic precision. She positioned herself between Tae-young and the direction of the gunfire, her body instinctively shielding his partially sutured wound from potential harm. Her hands pressed against the sterile dressing covering his injury, protecting the work she had just completed even as her heart hammered against her ribs with terror. "Maya, get away from the door," Tae-young said urgently, but she didn't move. Her focus remained fixed on protecting his wound, ensuring that whatever violence was happening in the building didn't undo the medical care she was providing. The gunfire intensified for approximately 3 minutes, automatic weapons exchanging volleys that shook the building's windows and sent Maya's pulse racing with primal fear. But she maintained her position, her body covering Tae-young's injury, her hands steady against the bandages even as adrenaline flooded her system with fight-or-flight chemicals. Then silence fell as abruptly as the violence had begun. Emergency lighting gave way to normal illumination, and Maya realized that Taeyong was staring at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. His dark eyes held something between surprise and recognition, as if she had just done something that fundamentally changed his assessment of her character. "You could have been killed," Taeyong said quietly. "You could have reopened this wound," Maya replied, checking the sutures for damage. "If the bleeding had started again during that attack, you could have gone into shock. So you used your body as a shield to protect my injury," Taeyong observed, his voice carrying a note of wonder that suggested this level of protective instinct was not something he encountered often. "I was protecting my patient," Maya said, but even as the words left her mouth, she realized they weren't entirely true. She had protected Taeyong himself, not just the medical care she was providing. She had positioned herself between him and danger without conscious thought, had acted on instinct that had nothing to do with professional duty and everything to do with something deeper and more personal. The office door opened to admit one of Taeyong's men, who spoke rapid Korean while gesturing toward other parts of the building. Taeyong responded in the same language, his tone commanding even while lying injured on the couch. Maya didn't understand the words, but the body language was clear. The threat had been eliminated, the situation was under control, and Taeyong was issuing instructions for cleanup and security. When the door closed again, leaving them alone, the atmosphere in the room had shifted into something charged with adrenaline and proximity and the aftermath of shared danger. Maya was still leaning over Taeyong's injury, her hands against his chest, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes and smell the expensive cologne that clung to his skin despite the blood and violence. "Thank you," Taeyong said softly, his gaze moving from Maya's eyes to her lips and back again. Maya felt her breathing shallow as she realized how close they were, how intimate this position had become, how the danger they had just survived had created a connection that went far beyond doctor and patient. She should step back, should finish his medical care professionally, should collect her payment, and leave his world before she became more entangled than she could handle. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by something in Taeyong's expression that promised things she had never considered wanting. When he kissed her, it was with the controlled intensity that defined everything about Kim Taeyong. His lips were warm and firm against hers, his hand sliding up to cup the back of her neck with surprising gentleness for someone who commanded armed men and survived knife fights. Maya felt herself responding before her rational mind could object, felt herself kissing him back with enthusiasm that should have terrified her, but instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss lasted until the office door opened again, admitting the same lieutenant who had reported on the attack. The man stopped abruptly when he saw their position, embarrassment and calculation flickering across his features before he cleared his throat and began speaking Korean in urgent tones. Taeyong responded without releasing Maya, his hands still warm against her neck, his attention focused on her face even while conducting business with his subordinate. When the conversation ended and the door closed again, Taeyong's thumb traced along Maya's jaw with possessive tenderness that made her pulse race. "That changed everything," Taeyong said quietly. "What do you mean?" Maya asked, though part of her already understood exactly what he meant. "You risked your life to protect me," Taeyong explained, his dark eyes holding hers with unblinking intensity. "Not because you were afraid of me, not because I was paying you, but because you couldn't stand the thought of me being hurt. That kind of protective instinct is precious, Maya. It's also mine now." Maya's heart hammered as she processed his words. "I barely know you," she protested. "This is crazy." "You'll be my personal medic," Taeyong continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Full-time position, generous salary, complete protection. Your financial problems will disappear, your grandmother will receive the best medical care available, and you'll never have to worry about debt or security again." "I can't just quit my job and work for you," Maya said, though even as the words left her mouth, she was calculating what his offer might mean. No more 12-hour hospital shifts, no more crushing student loan payments, no more watching her grandmother ration medication. "You already work for me," Taeyong pointed out, his fingers still tracing patterns against her skin that made coherent thought difficult. "The moment you put yourself between me and danger, you chose a side." The kiss just made it official. Maya realized that Taeyong was right. She had crossed a line tonight, had acted on instincts that had nothing to do with professional nursing and everything to do with personal protection. She had risked her life for a man she barely knew, had kissed him in the aftermath of violence, had felt more alive in his dangerous world than she ever had in the sterile safety of legitimate employment. "This is moving too fast," Maya said weakly. "Some things can't be controlled or planned," Taeyong replied, his thumb brushing across her lower lip with deliberate intimacy. "You're under my protection now, Maya. That kiss changed everything between us, and I don't share what's mine." The possessive certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Maya felt something deep in her chest respond to the promise of security, protection, and the kind of devotion that would eliminate every financial worry that had defined her adult life. Kim Taeyong was offering her a life she had never imagined possible, and all it would cost was entering his dangerous world permanently. As Taeyong's lips found hers again, Maya realized she was already lost. The next morning, Maya woke to find Kim Taeyong's business card on her nightstand along with a note written in precise handwriting. "Car will arrive at 2 p.m. to bring you to my office. We need to discuss your new position. Dress professionally." Maya stared at the card, realizing that Taeyong had somehow entered her locked apartment while she slept, had stood close enough to touch her while she was unconscious and vulnerable, had left evidence of his presence without waking her. The demonstration of access and capability was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. If he had wanted to harm her, he clearly could have done so without effort. Instead, he had left a polite invitation and withdrawn without disturbing her rest. Her grandmother was in the kitchen making breakfast when Maya emerged from her bedroom, the business card still clutched in her hand. Dolores took one look at Maya's expression and set down her coffee cup with concern creasing her weathered features. "What's wrong, baby girl?" Dolores asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Maya realized she had no way to explain the past few days to her grandmother, no way to describe the dangerous world she had entered or the complicated feelings developing for a man who commanded armed subordinates and survived knife fights. Instead, she held up the business card with its expensive embossed lettering and Korean characters she couldn't read. "I might have a new job opportunity," Maya said carefully. "Better pay, better benefits, but it would mean leaving the hospital." Dolores studied the card with the sharp intelligence that had made her a successful teacher before retirement. "This looks expensive," she observed. "What kind of work would you be doing?" "Private nursing," Maya replied, which was technically true if incomplete. "Taking care of people who need medical attention but prefer not to use hospitals." The car that arrived at precisely 2 o'clock was a sleek black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who introduced himself simply as Mr. Park before holding the rear door open with practiced formality. Maya had chosen her most professional outfit, a navy blazer and matching skirt that represented her entire interview wardrobe, but sitting in the luxurious interior made her feel like an imposter surrounded by leather and technology that cost more than her annual salary. The drive through Seoul took them from Maya's modest neighborhood into the city's most exclusive district, where glass towers stretched toward the sky and every building radiated wealth and power. The sedan pulled into the underground garage of a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds, and Maya was escorted to a private elevator that required a key card to access. Kim Taeyong's penthouse office occupied the entire top floor of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the sprawling city below. The space was decorated in shades of black and gray, with leather furniture, abstract artwork, and technology that looked both expensive and vaguely military. Everything spoke of serious money and serious power, from the Italian marble floors to the crystal decanters filled with liquor that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Maya stood in the center of the massive room, taking in the evidence of wealth that surrounded her while trying to process the magnitude of what Taeyong was offering. This was the world he inhabited, a realm of luxury and influence where decisions affected entire organizations and money moved in amounts she had never imagined possible. Taeyong emerged from an inner office wearing another impeccably tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe that caught the light as he moved. His left side showed no evidence of the previous night's injury, though Maya knew the sutures were still fresh under his perfectly pressed shirt. He moved with the same controlled grace that had marked their previous encounters, But now Maya was aware of the carefully hidden strength that allowed him to function normally despite significant physical trauma. "Thank you for coming," Taeyong said, gesturing toward a seating area arranged around a low glass table. "Please sit down. We have important matters to discuss." Maya chose a leather chair that probably cost more than her car, hyper-aware of how her modest professional clothes contrasted with the luxury surrounding her. Taeyong sat across from her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes and smell the expensive cologne that had become associated with safety and danger in equal measure. "I want to offer you a position as my personal medical consultant," Taeyong began without preamble. "Full-time employment with comprehensive benefits and compensation that will resolve all your financial concerns." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she processed his words. "What exactly would that involve?" she asked carefully. "You would live on my property in a private apartment equipped with everything you need for comfort and medical practice," Taeyong explained, his tone formal and businesslike. "Your primary responsibility would be providing medical care to me and select associates who require treatment that cannot be obtained through conventional channels. You would be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but actual medical emergencies are relatively rare. Most of your time would be your own to pursue continuing education, personal interests, or additional training." Maya's mind raced as she calculated what he was offering. Living on his property would eliminate her rent payments, and medical care for criminals would pay significantly more than hospital nursing. But 24-hour availability meant giving up any pretense of normal life, meant entering his world completely. "What about compensation?" Maya asked, though part of her was afraid to hear numbers that might be too tempting to refuse. $200,000 per year, Taeyong said calmly, plus complete coverage of your grandmother's medical expenses, elimination of your student loan debt, and a luxury apartment for your grandmother in a senior living facility with the best medical care available. You would also receive health insurance, life insurance, and a retirement account that would ensure your financial security for the rest of your life." Maya felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. $200,000 was more than 4 times her current salary, and the additional benefits would solve every financial problem that had defined her adult life. Her grandmother could receive the kind of medical care that had been an impossible dream, and Maya herself would never again have to choose between loan payments and basic necessities. But there had to be conditions, expectations beyond simple medical care that would explain such generous compensation. "What else would you expect from me?" Maya asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Absolute loyalty," Taeyong replied without hesitation. "Complete discretion regarding anything you observe while in my employment. Unquestioning obedience to my instructions regarding your safety and security. And exclusive availability, meaning you would not be permitted to seek outside employment or relationships without my approval." The word relationships made Maya's stomach flutter with something between excitement and apprehension. Taeyong was making it clear that accepting his offer meant belonging to him in ways that extended beyond professional obligations. "This sounds less like employment and more like ownership," Maya said carefully. "I protect what belongs to me," Taeyong acknowledged, his dark eyes holding hers with unblinking intensity. "In return, what belongs to me receives every advantage I can provide. Your grandmother would receive medical care that money cannot normally buy. You would have access to training and education that could advance your career beyond anything possible in conventional nursing. Your safety would be ensured by security measures that eliminate most of the dangers that threaten ordinary people." Maya felt herself wavering as she calculated the implications of his offer. $200,000 per year would change her life completely, would give her grandmother years of healthy living, would provide security she had never imagined possible. But accepting meant entering a world where her choices would be controlled by a man who commanded criminal organizations and resolved conflicts with violence. "I need to think about this," Maya said, though even as the words left her mouth, she could feel herself being drawn toward acceptance. "Of course," Taeyong agreed. "But while you're considering my offer, you should be aware of certain developments that make your decision more urgent." He reached into his jacket and produced a manila folder, which he placed on the glass table between them. Maya opened it with trembling fingers to find photographs that made her blood run cold. Pictures of her apartment building taken from across the street. Pictures of her grandmother entering and leaving the building. Pictures of Maya herself walking to her car after work, unaware that she was being watched and photographed. Who took these? Maya asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Associates of the men who attacked my office last night, Taeyong explained calmly. They've identified you as someone important to me, which makes you a target for anyone seeking leverage against my organization. Your grandmother is also at risk, as are any family members or close friends who might be used to influence your behavior. Maya stared at the photographs, realizing that her decision to enter Taeyong's world had already placed everyone she cared about in danger. The men who had attacked the warehouse had clearly conducted surveillance, had identified her as someone worth threatening, had put her grandmother at risk simply because Maya had provided medical care and shared a kiss with Kim Taeyong. What does that mean for us? Maya asked weakly. It means you're already in my world whether you accept employment or not, Taeyong replied with gentle finality. The difference is that as my employee, you would have the full protection of my organization. Your grandmother would be moved to secure housing with 24-hour security. You would live in accommodations that are monitored and defended by people trained to eliminate threats before they develop into actual danger. Maya realized that Taeyong was right. She had crossed a line by treating his injury, by protecting him during the attack, by kissing him in the aftermath of violence. The choice was no longer between her current life and his offer, but between accepting his protection or remaining vulnerable to retaliation from his enemies. And if I refuse, Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. You would return to your current life with my apologies and a substantial cash payment for the inconvenience I've caused, Taeyong said diplomatically. But you would also remain a target for anyone seeking to harm me, without the protection I could provide as your employer. Your grandmother would continue receiving excellent medical care at my expense, but she would also require security measures that might restrict her freedom and peace of mind. Maya looked at the photographs again, seeing her grandmother's smiling face captured by hostile cameras, seeing evidence of surveillance that had been conducted while she thought they were safe and anonymous. The reality was that Kim Taeyong's enemies had already identified her as valuable, had already marked her grandmother as potential leverage, had already made her normal life impossible. She thought about her crushing student loan debt, about her grandmother's rationed insulin, about the endless cycle of financial stress that defined every decision she made. She thought about working 12-hour shifts for decades while watching her dreams slip further away, about retiring with nothing and hoping Social Security would cover basic needs. Then she thought about $200,000 per year, about her grandmother receiving the best medical care available, about never again having to choose between loan payments and groceries. She thought about living in luxury while advancing her medical career, about security that would eliminate the fears that kept her awake at night. But mostly she thought about Kim Taeyong's dark eyes promising protection and devotion that would surround her like armor, promising a life where someone with unlimited resources was committed to ensuring her safety and happiness. Maya looked across the glass table at the man who had somehow become central to her future, who offered everything she had ever wanted in exchange for belonging to him completely. The choice was terrifying and obvious and inevitable all at once. I accept your offer, Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was choosing. Taeyong's expression shifted into something that might have been relief mixed with satisfaction, as if her acceptance meant more to him than simply acquiring competent medical care. He reached across the table to cover her hand with his, and Maya felt the warmth of his touch like a promise of everything he had described. Welcome to your new life, Maya, Taeyong said softly. I'll arrange for your grandmother's transfer to secure housing immediately, and your apartment will be ready by this evening. From this moment forward, you're under my protection, and I take care of what belongs to me. As Maya sat in Kim Taeyong's luxurious penthouse office, her hand warm under his touch, she realized she had just traded her independence for security, her normal life for luxury, her freedom for the kind of devotion that promised to transform everything about her existence. The decision should have terrified her, but instead she felt something like peace settling over her as she accepted that her future now belonged to a dangerous man who had proven he would kill to protect what was his. 2 months after accepting Kim Taeyong's offer, Maya had settled into a life she could never have imagined possible. Her private apartment within his compound was larger than any place she had ever lived, equipped with state-of-the-art medical facilities and luxurious furnishings that made her previous existence seem like a distant memory of struggle and limitation. Every morning, Maya woke to views of Seoul's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, drank coffee that cost more per pound than her old weekly grocery budget, and checked on her grandmother through video calls that showed Dolores thriving in her new senior living facility. The medication that had once been rationed was now unlimited. The medical care that had once been hoped for was now routine, and the financial stress that had once defined every decision was now completely eliminated. Maya's medical duties varied from routine care to emergency trauma, but Taeyong had been accurate about the relative infrequency of serious incidents. Most of her time was spent maintaining health records for his key associates, treating minor injuries sustained during business operations, and ensuring that everyone in his organization had access to medical care that wouldn't create unwanted attention from authorities. She had treated knife wounds and gunshot injuries, had sutured cuts from broken glass, and set bones fractured during territorial disputes. The work was challenging and occasionally dangerous, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways that hospital nursing had never been. Her patients trusted her completely, grateful for medical care that came without questions or judgment, and Taeyong's approval of her work was evident in the way his associates treated her with respectful deference. But it was the quiet moments between medical emergencies that had begun to change everything about how Maya saw Kim Taeyong and her place in his dangerous world. She had discovered that the man who commanded criminal organizations and eliminated threats with terrifying efficiency was also someone who remembered the birthdays of every person in his employ, who personally ensured that the elderly cleaning staff received comprehensive health care, who maintained traditional Korean customs with meticulous attention to honoring his ancestors and preserving cultural connections to the family he had lost. Maya often found him in the compound's small meditation room early in the morning, sitting in perfect stillness before a shrine decorated with photographs of people she assumed were deceased family members. He never spoke about these sessions, but Maya could see the grief and reverence in his posture, could understand that his connection to Korean traditions was deeply personal rather than merely cultural performance. One evening in late November, Maya was organizing medical supplies when she heard piano music drifting from the compound's main living area. She followed the sound to discover Taeyong playing a complex classical piece with skill that suggested years of serious training. His long fingers moved across the keys with the same precision he applied to everything else, but there was something vulnerable about watching him create beauty rather than conducting violence. "You play beautifully," Maya said when the piece concluded, stepping into the room where expensive artwork and leather furniture created an atmosphere of refined luxury. "My sister taught me," Taeyong replied without looking up from the piano keys. "She insisted that someone in our family should create something beautiful instead of only destroying what others built." It was the first time he had mentioned his sister, and Maya could hear the weight of grief in his voice as he spoke about her. She moved closer, drawn by the rare glimpse of vulnerability from a man who usually maintained perfect emotional control. "What was her name?" Maya asked gently. "Sujin," Taeyong said, his fingers tracing silent patterns on the piano keys. 3 years younger than me. Everything good and innocent in a family business that required neither goodness nor innocence. She believed I could be better than what our father trained me to become." Maya settled beside him on the piano bench, close enough to see the pain flickering across his usually composed features. She had learned to read the subtle signs of his emotional state, the slight tension in his jaw when he was angry, the way his hands stilled when he was processing difficult information, the barely perceptible softening around his eyes when he looked at her with something deeper than professional appreciation. "What happened to her?" Maya asked, though she suspected the answer would be difficult to hear. Taeyong was quiet for several moments, his gaze fixed on family photographs arranged on top of the piano. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of guilt that had clearly shaped everything about how he approached relationships and protection. "She fell in love with someone outside our world," Taeyong said quietly. "A graduate student studying international business, someone clean and legitimate who represented everything she wanted our lives to become. I approved the relationship because it made her happy, because I thought love might give her reasons to stay away from family business operations. Maya waited while Taeyong gathered himself to continue, understanding that this story was central to everything about who he had become and why her protective instinct during the warehouse attack had affected him so profoundly. What I didn't realize was that her boyfriend had gambling debts to a rival organization, debts that made Sujin valuable as leverage against our family's interests. Taeyong continued, his hands clenching into fists on the piano keys. The Yakuza group that held his debts decided that kidnapping the sister of a Korean crime boss would either eliminate a competitor or generate substantial ransom payments. Maya felt her heart constrict with sympathy as she began to understand the source of Taeyong's protective obsession, the reason he surrounded himself with armed security and treated threats with such decisive violence. She was taken from her university campus on a Tuesday afternoon, Taeyong said, his voice steady but brittle with suppressed emotion. The boyfriend had provided information about her schedule, her habits, her vulnerability. He traded her life for debt forgiveness and safe passage out of the country. The silence in the room was heavy with grief and rage as Maya processed the implications of what Taeyong had shared. His sister had been betrayed by someone she loved, had been sacrificed to criminal violence by the person who should have protected her, had paid for her family's business with her innocent life. I found her 3 days later, Taeyong continued, his dark eyes meeting Maya's with an intensity that made her breath catch. They had tortured her for information about family operations, had used her pain as leverage to demand territorial concessions, had treated her like a commodity to be bartered rather than a person deserving of basic human dignity. Maya reached out instinctively, covering Taeyong's clenched hands with her own warm palms. She could feel the tension in his muscles, could understand that this memory still had the power to shake the controlled exterior he maintained in all other circumstances. By the time I eliminated everyone responsible for taking her, it was too late to save her life, but not too late to ensure she received justice, Taeyong said, his voice carrying the cold finality that marked his most dangerous moods. I spent 2 years hunting down every person who participated in her kidnapping, torture, and murder. None of them survived the experience. Maya felt a complex mix of horror and admiration as she processed Taeyong's confession. The violence he described should have terrified her, but she could understand that his sister's death had transformed him into someone who would never again allow people he cared about to be harmed by enemies seeking leverage or revenge. "I'm sorry you lost her," Maya said softly, her thumbs tracing gentle patterns across his knuckles. "She sounds like she was an amazing person. She would have liked you," Taeyong replied, his tension beginning to ease under Maya's touch. She believed that people could choose to be better than their circumstances, that love could transform even the darkest situations into something beautiful. "Is that why you've been so protective of me?" Maya asked, beginning to understand the deeper motivations behind his overwhelming security measures and possessive behavior. "Partly," Taeyong acknowledged, turning his hands to capture Maya's fingers with gentle pressure. "But protecting you isn't just about preventing what happened to Sujin. You're not a replacement for my sister or an attempt to heal old wounds." Maya felt her pulse quicken as Taeyong's dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that seemed to see directly into her soul. "You're something entirely different," Taeyong continued, his voice dropping to an intimate tone that made Maya acutely aware of their proximity on the piano bench. "When you put yourself between me and danger that night at the warehouse, when you protected my injury instead of protecting yourself, you showed me something I thought I would never find again." "What was that?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from the way Taeyong was looking at her with reverence that bordered on worship. "Someone who would choose my safety over her own without calculation or self-interest. Someone whose protective instincts are stronger than her survival instincts. Someone who makes me believe that I might deserve something better than a life built entirely on violence and control." Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes as she understood the depth of what Taeyong was sharing with her. His sister's death had convinced him that love was dangerous, that caring about people only created vulnerabilities for enemies to exploit, that protecting someone meant maintaining distance and emotional barriers that prevented true intimacy. But Maya's automatic response to shield him during the attack had shown him that genuine care could coexist with strength, that love could make people braver rather than weaker, that someone might choose to protect him not because they were paid or coerced, but because his safety mattered to them on a fundamental level. Taeyong, Maya whispered, her voice catching on his name as she leaned closer to the man who had somehow become the center of her new existence. When he kissed her this time, it was different from their first desperate encounter in the aftermath of violence and adrenaline. This kiss was slow and deliberate, full of promises and possibilities that extended far beyond their original arrangement. Maya felt herself responding with her whole heart, felt herself falling completely and irreversibly in love with a dangerous man who had shown her his deepest wounds and trusted her with his most painful memories. They spent the next hour talking quietly while Taeyong played gentle melodies that filled the room with beauty and peace. Maya learned about his childhood in Korea, about the family traditions he maintained to honor his deceased parents, about his dreams for legitimizing at least part of his business operations so that future generations might have choices he had never possessed. In return, Maya shared stories about growing up with her grandmother after her parents' death, about the determination that had carried her through nursing school despite financial hardship, about her dreams of opening a community health clinic that could provide medical care to people who couldn't afford traditional health care. As the evening progressed, Maya realized that she was no longer simply working for Kim Taeyong or accepting his protection out of necessity. She was falling in love with him, with his complexity and vulnerability, with the way he balanced ruthless efficiency in business with surprising gentleness in personal moments, with the devotion he offered to people who had earned his trust and care. But even as Maya acknowledged her growing feelings, she was aware that their world remained dangerous in ways that could never be completely controlled or eliminated. The first warning signs appeared the following week, subtle indicators that someone was conducting surveillance on Taeyong's operations with particular interest in his personal vulnerabilities. Security reports mentioned unusual activity around the compound, vehicles that appeared repeatedly in different locations, telephone conversations that suggested hostile organizations were gathering information about family structure and personal relationships. Maya had learned to recognize the signs of escalating threat levels in Taeyong's organization. Increased security patrols, additional background checks on all personnel, restrictions on movement that were implemented without explanation but clearly indicated that someone was probing for weaknesses that could be exploited. One morning in early December, Maya was reviewing medical records when Taeyong's head of security entered her office with an expression that made her immediately nervous. Mr. Cho was a compact, efficient man who treated Maya with respectful formality, but today his usual professional demeanor carried undertones of genuine concern. Ms. Maya, Mr. Cho said formally, we've detected surveillance activities that suggest hostile interest in your daily routines and schedule. Mr. Kim has instructed me to implement additional security measures for your protection. What kind of surveillance? Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the details. Photographic documentation of your movements within the compound, technical monitoring of your communications with your grandmother, background investigations into your personal history and family connections. Someone is building a detailed profile of your vulnerabilities and relationships. Maya felt cold dread settling in her stomach as she processed the implications. The same pattern that had marked the beginning of threats against Taeyong's sister was now being directed at her, suggesting that hostile organizations had identified her as someone valuable enough to use as leverage. Does Mr. Kim know about this? Maya asked. He's the one who ordered the security enhancement, Mr. Cho replied. He's also requested that you avoid leaving the compound unless accompanied by armed escorts, and that all communication with your grandmother be conducted through secured channels that cannot be monitored or intercepted. That evening, Maya found Taeyong in his office reviewing security reports that she suspected contained detailed information about the threats being directed at her. His expression was calm but dangerous. The cold focus that she had learned indicated he was planning responses to eliminate problems before they could develop into actual crises. How serious is this? Maya asked without preamble. Serious enough that I'm implementing full protective protocols, Taeyong replied, setting down the reports to give Maya his complete attention. The Yakuza group that killed my sister has apparently decided that attacking my personal relationships is an effective strategy for creating leverage. Maya felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she understood that accepting Taeyong's protection had painted a target on her back, had made her valuable to his enemies in ways that could never be completely eliminated. 3 days later, Maya discovered exactly how serious the threat had become when she found a black envelope slipped under her apartment door while she was treating a patient's minor knife wound. Inside was a single photograph of her grandmother sitting in the garden of her senior living facility, unaware that hostile cameras were documenting her daily activities for purposes that were clearly threatening. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a message in precise handwriting that made Maya's blood run cold with terror and recognition. Pretty nurses can disappear as easily as piano-playing sisters. Cooperation brings safety. Resistance brings consequences. Maya realized that Kim Taeyong's enemies had identified her not just as leverage, but as a specific target for the same kind of violence that had destroyed his sister, and that all the security and protection in the world might not be enough to prevent history from repeating itself in ways that would destroy everyone she had learned to love. The attack came on a Tuesday morning while Taeyong was conducting business in Busan, leaving Maya alone in the compound with only standard security protocols to protect her. She was reviewing patient files in her medical office when the lights went out, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of suppressed gunfire that meant professionals were eliminating the compound's outer defenses with military precision. Maya's training kicked in automatically as she moved to the panic room Taeyong had shown her during her first week in the compound. Her fingers found the silent alarm button that would alert his security forces and summon immediate backup, but even as she pressed it, Maya could hear heavy footsteps moving through the building with purpose and coordination that suggested extensive planning. The panic room door was reinforced steel designed to withstand explosive charges, but Maya realized that whoever was conducting this operation had come prepared for sophisticated security measures. The sound of cutting equipment echoed through the walls as hostile forces worked to breach her sanctuary with tools that suggested substantial funding and professional expertise. Maya pressed herself against the far wall of the panic room, her heart hammering as she understood that the threats against her had escalated from surveillance to direct action. Someone had decided that kidnapping Kim Taeyong's woman was worth the inevitable retaliation, which meant they either had overwhelming confidence in their ability to control the situation or were desperate enough to risk everything on one decisive gamble. The cutting stopped abruptly, followed by voices speaking rapid Japanese that Maya couldn't understand but recognized as the language Taeyong had mentioned in connection with the Yakuza organization responsible for his sister's death. Her blood ran cold as she realized that the same people who had tortured and murdered Sujin had decided to target her as their next leverage point against Taeyong's operations. When the panic room door finally gave way, Maya found herself facing 5 men in tactical gear whose professional efficiency and cold expressions suggested this was routine business rather than personal vendetta. The leader gestured with his weapon for Maya to come forward, his movements economical and confident in ways that indicated extensive experience with kidnapping operations. Dr. Maya Johnson, the leader said in accented English, "You will come with us quietly, or we will be forced to use measures that will make your cooperation less comfortable." Maya realized that resistance would be pointless against trained operatives who had clearly planned this operation down to the smallest detail. She followed them through the compound, stepping over the bodies of security personnel who had been eliminated with professional efficiency that left no doubt about the attackers' capabilities and ruthlessness. The van waiting outside was equipped with restraints and soundproofing that suggested Maya was not their first kidnapping victim. As they drove through Seoul's industrial district, Maya understood that she was experiencing the same terror that had marked the beginning of Sujin's ordeal, that she was about to become a bargaining chip in negotiations that would probably end with her death regardless of whether Taeyong met their demands. The warehouse where they held her was anonymous and isolated, filled with shipping containers that could conceal screams and contain bodies without attracting unwanted attention from authorities. Maya was secured to a chair in a makeshift office area where her captors could conduct video calls while keeping her visible as proof of their success. Within 2 hours of her capture, the leader was speaking Korean into a satellite phone with the confident tone of someone delivering terms to a defeated opponent. Maya couldn't understand the words, But she could hear Taeyong's voice on the other end, cold and controlled in ways that suggested he was calculating responses rather than negotiating surrender. "Your woman is very beautiful," the leader said in English, clearly intending for Maya to hear the threat implicit in his observation. It would be unfortunate if she were damaged before arrangements for her return could be completed. Maya felt terror and rage in equal measure as she understood that her captors intended to use sexual violence as leverage, that they viewed her as property to be threatened and bargained rather than a person deserving of basic human dignity. This was exactly what had happened to Sujin, exactly the pattern of escalating threat and brutality that had ended in murder. The ransom demands were delivered with precision that indicated extensive planning. Taeyong would withdraw from 3 territorial disputes, would pay compensation for recent business losses suffered by Yakuza operations, and would provide guarantees of non-interference in future activities. In return, Maya would be released unharmed within 24 hours. But if the terms were rejected, Maya would disappear into an international trafficking network that specialized in providing medical professionals to criminal organizations that operated beyond the reach of law enforcement. She would spend the rest of her life treating injuries for people who had purchased her from her current captors, never again free to make choices about her own existence. Maya listened to these terms with growing understanding that her association with Taeyong had placed her in exactly the same situation that had cost his sister her life. The difference was that Taeyong now had 3 years of additional experience, resources, and cold determination to ensure that history would not repeat itself. The rescue operation began exactly 18 hours after Maya's capture, announced by explosions that shook the warehouse walls and cut all electrical power to the building. Emergency lighting revealed armed figures moving through the facility with tactical precision that made her captor's earlier operation look amateurish by comparison. Maya heard gunfire, shouted commands in Korean, and the sounds of systematic elimination as Taeyong's forces worked through the warehouse methodically. There were no negotiations, no attempts to secure surrender, no mercy shown to people who had threatened someone under Kim Taeyong's protection. When Taeyong himself appeared in the office area where Maya was being held, his appearance was transformed from the controlled businessman she knew into something far more dangerous. His expensive suit was replaced by tactical gear, his usual calm demeanor replaced by cold fury that radiated from every line of his body. He was no longer the man who played piano and shared vulnerable stories about his deceased sister. He was the crime boss who had spent 2 years hunting down everyone responsible for Sujin's death. "Maya," Taeyong said, his voice carrying relief and rage in equal measure as he moved to cut her restraints. "I'm okay," Maya replied, though her voice shook with reaction to 18 hours of terror and the aftermath of violence that had secured her freedom. Taeyong's hands were gentle as he checked her for injuries, but Maya could see the lethal calculation in his eyes as he processed what her captors had planned for her. His touch was reverent and possessive, as if he needed physical contact to confirm that she was alive and whole and still his. The warehouse fell silent as Taeyong's men completed their systematic elimination of everyone who had participated in Maya's kidnapping. There were no survivors, no prisoners, no loose ends that could create future complications. The Yakuza operation that had targeted her was completely eradicated, their leadership structure destroyed with the same thoroughness that had marked Taeyong's response to his sister's murder. Maya realized that she was witnessing the full extent of Kim Taeyong's power and ruthlessness, seeing what happened when someone threatened something he had claimed as his own. The violence was efficient and absolute, designed to send a message that would prevent future attempts to use her as leverage. As they left the warehouse, Maya saw the aftermath of Taeyong's response to threats against his woman. Bodies were being loaded into vehicles for disposal, evidence was being systematically eliminated, and witnesses were being silenced in ways that would ensure this incident never appeared in official investigations. "They came for you because of me," Taeyong said during the drive back to his compound, his voice carrying guilt that Maya had never heard from him before. "They came for me because they thought I was weak," Maya replied, understanding now that her captors had fundamentally miscalculated both her value to Taeyong and his willingness to destroy entire organizations to protect her. "You're not weak," Taeyong said, his hand finding hers with desperate intensity. "You're precious. You're mine." and I eliminate anything that threatens what's mine. Maya felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of Kim Tae-young and her place in his world. She had witnessed the violence that protected her, had seen the absolute ruthlessness that ensured her safety, had experienced firsthand what it meant to be claimed by someone who would destroy enemies completely rather than risk losing her to future threats. That night, as Maya lay safe in her apartment within Tae-young's heavily secured compound, she realized that loving him meant accepting not just his gentleness and vulnerability, but also his capacity for violence that served protective purposes. She had seen the darkness that kept her safe, had witnessed the brutality that eliminated threats before they could harm her, had experienced the security that came from belonging to someone whose response to danger was swift and final. Maya understood that Kim Tae-young's enemies had made the same mistake as his sister's killers, believing that threatening someone he loved would create weakness rather than unleashing the full extent of his power and determination. They had discovered that taking what belonged to Kim Tae-young was not a strategy for gaining leverage, but a guarantee of complete destruction. As she drifted toward sleep surrounded by security measures that would prevent any repetition of her ordeal, Maya accepted that she was no longer simply a nurse who worked for a criminal organization. She was Kim Tae-young's woman, protected by violence and claimed with devotion that would eliminate any threat to her safety or happiness. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, Maya felt something like peace settling over her as she acknowledged that she belonged to a man whose love was demonstrated through the complete elimination of anything that dared to threaten her. In the immediate aftermath of Maya's rescue, Kim Tae-young's emotional control cracked completely. She found him in his private office 3 hours after their return to the compound, sitting behind his massive desk with his head in his hands, still wearing tactical gear, stained with evidence of the violence he had unleashed to secure her freedom. Maya had never seen him vulnerable in this way, stripped of the careful composure that defined his public persona and reduced to raw emotion that spoke of how deeply her kidnapping had affected him. When he looked up at her approach, his dark eyes were haunted with the kind of fear that came from nearly losing something irreplaceable. "I can't do this again," Tae-young said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of memories and terror that had driven him to eliminate an entire criminal organization in 18 hours. "I can't spend my life waiting for the next group of enemies to target you because they think you're my weakness." Maya moved around the desk to stand beside his chair, understanding that Tae-young was processing not just her recent ordeal, but also the trauma of watching his sister disappear into violence that he had been powerless to prevent. The pattern was too similar, too reminiscent of threats that had ended in devastating loss. "You're not weak for caring about me," Maya said softly, her hand finding his shoulder with gentle pressure that grounded him in the present moment. "Caring about you makes me stronger," Tae-young replied, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips with reverent tenderness. "But it also makes you a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. The only way to eliminate that vulnerability is to make your protection a matter of honor and international law rather than personal attachment." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she began to understand what Tae-young was suggesting. Marriage would transform her from his employee and lover into his wife, would provide legal protections and social standing that made threats against her significantly more complicated and dangerous for potential enemies. "Marry me," Tae-young said, his words carrying the weight of command and plea in equal measure. "Not just because I love you, though I do love you more than I thought possible. Marry me because as my wife, you become untouchable. Family honor, international agreements, diplomatic considerations, all become factors that protect you in ways that personal security can never guarantee." Maya realized that Tae-young was offering marriage as both romantic commitment and strategic necessity, that he had calculated the various forms of protection available to her and determined that becoming his wife provided the highest level of security against future threats. "You're asking me to marry you to keep me safe," Maya said, though she could hear the deeper emotions underlying his practical reasoning. "I'm asking you to marry me because I cannot live without you," Tae-young corrected, standing to face her with intensity that made her breath catch. "The safety considerations are necessary, but they're not the only reason. You've become essential to everything about who I am and who I want to become." Maya looked into Tae-young's dark eyes and saw the man who had shared his most painful memories with her, who had revealed vulnerabilities that he showed to no one else, who had demonstrated his devotion through violence that eliminated threats before they could harm her. Marriage would formalize what had already become true in every way that mattered. Yes, Maya said simply, her voice steady with the certainty that had been building since their first kiss in the aftermath of danger and adrenaline. Taeyong's relief was immediate and profound, his arms wrapping around Maya with desperate gratitude that spoke of how much her answer meant to him. When he kissed her, it carried promises of protection and devotion that would transform her life completely and permanently. The wedding ceremony took place 6 weeks later, combining traditional Korean customs with legal formalities that would ensure Maya's protection under both cultural and international law. Taeyong had arranged for the service to be conducted in his family's ancestral temple in Seoul, honoring his deceased parents and maintaining connections to traditions that gave meaning to his commitment. Maya wore a traditional Korean hanbok in deep burgundy silk, the formal attire marking her acceptance into Taeyong's family and cultural heritage. The ceremony itself was attended by his entire organization, men who treated the occasion with the reverence reserved for events that affected their leaders' happiness and the stability of their community. As they exchanged vows in Korean and English, Maya understood that she was not simply marrying Kim Taeyong, but accepting membership in a family structure that extended far beyond traditional definitions. His associates would now treat threats against her as attacks on their collective honor, would provide protection that went beyond professional obligation into personal loyalty. The legal marriage ceremony that followed was conducted by officials who understood the importance of ensuring that Maya's new status would be recognized in all jurisdictions where Taeyong conducted business. As his wife, she gained access to financial resources, legal protections, and social standing that would make future kidnapping attempts politically complicated and diplomatically dangerous. But beyond the strategic considerations, Maya realized that marriage represented the completion of her transformation from struggling nurse to protected partner in one of Asia's most powerful criminal organizations. She was no longer simply someone who worked for Kim Taeyong. She was someone whose safety and happiness had become central to his identity and purpose. During the reception held in the compound's main hall, Maya watched Taeyong interact with his associates and realized how completely her presence had changed him. The cold efficiency that had once defined all his relationships was now tempered with warmth that extended to everyone in his organization. Marriage had not made him soft, but it had made him more human in ways that strengthened rather than weakened his leadership. 3 months after their wedding, Maya was reviewing plans for the medical clinic that would serve as her new professional focus when Taeyong entered her office carrying coffee and wearing an expression that suggested important news. The Yakuza families that were considering retaliation for their associates' elimination have formally withdrawn all threats against our organization, Taeyong announced, setting down Maya's coffee with satisfaction evident in his voice. What changed their minds? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Word spread through criminal networks that attacking Kim Taeyong's wife results in the complete destruction of everyone involved, including leadership structures and family members, Taeyong explained with cold efficiency. They've decided that territorial disputes are not worth risking total annihilation. Maya realized that their marriage had achieved exactly the protective effect Taeyong had calculated, that her status as his wife had eliminated the vulnerability that enemies might have continued to exploit. The threats that had once seemed inevitable were now considered too dangerous to pursue. The medical clinic that Maya established within the compound served both Taeyong's organization and select members of allied families who required medical care that couldn't be obtained through legitimate channels. Her work was challenging and rewarding, providing advanced trauma care while maintaining the discretion that their world required. Maya had also enrolled in advanced medical training programs that Taeyong's resources made possible, pursuing specializations that would have been financially impossible in her previous life. Her education was now limited only by her ambitions and interests rather than by crushing debt and financial necessity. Her grandmother Dolores had thrived in her new environment, receiving medical care that had stabilized her diabetes completely while enjoying luxury accommodations and social activities that filled her retirement with comfort and engagement. The financial stress that had once defined their relationship was now a distant memory replaced by security and abundance. One evening 6 months after their wedding, Maya found Taeyong in the meditation room where he maintained his family shrine, adding fresh flowers to arrangements that honored his deceased sister. She joined him in the quiet ritual that had become part of their shared routine, understanding that their marriage had helped heal wounds that had shaped everything about his approach to love and protection. "Do you think Sujin would approve of what we've built together?" Maya asked quietly. "She would be amazed that someone like you chose to stay with someone like me," Taeyong replied, his arm wrapping around Maya's waist with possessive tenderness. She always believed that love could transform even the darkest circumstances, that caring for someone could make them better than they thought possible. Maya leaned into Taeyong's embrace, understanding that their relationship had achieved exactly the transformation his sister had hoped for. Marriage had not eliminated the violence that protected their world, but it had given that violence purpose and meaning that extended beyond simple survival or territorial control. "You've made me better than I thought possible," Taeyong murmured against Maya's hair, his voice carrying the vulnerability that he showed only to her. "You've given me reasons to build something beyond destruction, to create rather than simply eliminate, to hope for futures that extend beyond immediate threats and responses." Maya turned in his arms to face the man who had become her husband, her protector, and her partner in building a life that balanced darkness with light, violence with tenderness, criminal necessity with genuine love. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted," Maya replied, her hands framing his face with reverence that matched his own devotion to her. As they stood together in the quiet space dedicated to honoring family and tradition, Maya realized that her journey from desperate nurse responding to emergency calls had led to a life of security, purpose, and love that exceeded anything she had imagined possible. She had entered Kim Taeyong's world to treat a gunshot wound for money she desperately needed. She remained in his world as his wife, protected by his devotion and empowered by resources that allowed her to pursue dreams that had once been impossible fantasies. Maya Johnson had become Maya Kim, and in accepting that transformation, she had discovered that sometimes the most dangerous choices led to the most extraordinary outcomes. One kiss had indeed changed everything, but the marriage that followed had secured a future where love and protection combined to create something more powerful than either could achieve alone.